right, welcome everyone. Thank you for coming. I appreciate you came out on this rainy November night. We're here tonight to share with you our work so far on the Northshire Merger Study Committee. Hopefully you've heard a lot about it, and I appreciate that you're engaging in the process. My name is John Wilson. I'm the chair of the Merger Committee, and we have some other committee members up here that reflect that diversity of the committee as far as the towns represented. So I'm just going to have them briefly introduce themselves, and then I'm going to do a presentation, and then we're going to have Q&A. So Ed, could you start? Or Jim, why don't you start down there?
I'm Jim Miranda. I'm a school board member in Dorset. I'm a Dorset parent of 3 students.
I'm Nancy Wolf. I'm the at-large member for Sunderland and a local resident.
My name is Jay Willett. I'm the Peru representative for the Mountain Towns Red, and have 4 children of my own in the school system.
I'm Jen Loudon, and I'm a school board member from Danby.
I'm Ed Morrow from Manchester, an ex-school board member, two boys who went through MEMS and 2 granddaughters who went through Floodbrook. So I'm interested in what's going on.
So you notice that the mics might not be doing anything. We're filming this for GNAT, so we're going to try to get the best sound that we can. And you're welcome to ask some questions during the presentation. You can try to hold off. Hopefully I'll get to them. If you feel like you need to ask that question, I'm going to try to repeat it so people at home can hear the question. There were a lot of people who wanted to be here tonight, but with kids or various obligations. So we're going to try to make this as clean and as transparent for them at home. So again, thanks for coming. And so first of all, I'm going to explain, Act 46 encourages school districts to merge, strongly encourages, and that's like you might encourage your kid to do homework, right? And so there's some strong language in there, and we're going to get to that later, but it's not about merging schools, okay? It's not about merging schools. It doesn't require schools to merge, but that may be an outcome later on. So that's just the first thing to remember for us tonight. And the first big disclaimer I'll run tonight is that this presentation is not about Act 46, the merit of Act 46. So we don't want to get into whether we think it's a good idea or a bad idea. What I really appreciate about this committee is that we've operated on a surplus thinking model, really, not getting caught up in admiring the problem, but what opportunities can we make from this problem? And the committee's been so positive. And so, again, we're not going to get hung up on the merit of Act 46 tonight, but we're going to talk about what are the, if you want to talk about that, you can talk to these guys here, okay? If you're from Manchester, or maybe Brian in a few weeks, Brian Keefe back here, or if you're not from Manchester, you can find your own reps. But these are the guys you talk to, okay, if you have a problem with Act 46. And so the proposed name of the district, the school district that we might merge into, is called Peconic and Green School District. And we came up and we developed that the other night at our district, our merger committee meeting. And so we have all these different members that comprise this merger study committee. So let me step back a second. In the fall, after Act 46 was passed a couple years ago, and last fall, the local school boards in these towns that comprise these districts, they decided they wanted to enter into a study committee. Now, a study committee is it's a mandated part of the law, right? If you're going to merge into a new school district, you have to follow this process they call the 706 process, which has been around since really the 50s, or been around for a while. And the Mountain Towns Red, right? Some of you may have never heard of that, and we'll talk about what a red is in a second. But the Mountain Towns Red, they did that in 2012, I think. Is that correct? 2012, and that's Peru, Weston, Londonderry, and Landgrove. They decided we're going to merge together into a new school district. So it's taking it even a step farther back. Thinking about the history of school districts in Vermont, in the mid-1800s, we had around 2,500 school districts in the state of Vermont. 2,500. Now we have about, in 1892, there was legislation passed that consolidated school districts to down about 300. That number has not changed all that much since the late 1890s. We're about upper 200s now. Okay, so part of Act 46 is to consolidate the school districts. And we're going to talk exactly what that means when a school district merges. So here are the towns, the districts that comprise this merger study committee. And they have, in order to, the metaphor that's been used a lot, if you're going to merge districts, is the metaphor that's been popular is finding dance partners, right? If you think of it like a high school dance, right? And who can you dance with? The people who you dance with are determined by the choice option that you have in your district. So Manchester, for example, has 9 through 12 choice. And Dorset does, and the Mountain Towns Red do. Okay, you can't merge, if you merge with another district, you can't have different enrollment options. Now the thinking, the popular, or the predominant legal interpretation from the state is that if you were allowed to have different choice options within the same district, it would be unconstitutional. It would violate the state constitution, more specifically the Common Benefit Clause of the state constitution. And so, so all of us in this member districts here, if we are to merge, we will have the same choice option. Sunderland, Danby, Mount Tabor currently have 7 through 12 choice. If they are going to merge with us, they have to give up 7th and 8th grade choice. Okay, so that's the biggest criteria for districts to merge, is that they have the same choice option. And that's how you find your dance partner, okay? And that's how we found our dance partner. But I think more importantly, these communities here have a lot of a natural bond, a cultural bond that has gone back for years and years, that there's some, you know, I think we illustrate it on our committee that, you know, there's some cultural bond between our neighbors. So what do? We study the benefits of merging and the implications of merging. Okay, and that's what we spent. We've had about, I don't know, 16, 17 3-hour meetings, you know, in the past since, what, the summer and fall. We've had all these about 3-hour long meetings and the study, the implications and benefits of merging. And that's what we're going to talk about tonight. So what is our process and timeline? Well, stepping back, you know, we talked about last fall, we created this study committee. Now, moving forward, next week on Monday, we're going to have a meeting, a committee meeting, and we're going to vote on whether it's advisable. The committee will vote on whether it's advisable for us to merge together. Okay, that's a pretty much up or down vote. I feel pretty confident right now that's going to happen. You know, we haven't heard much overwhelming support from the committee to vote it down. I think that vote sounds like it's likely to happen. Please come to the meeting on that date, and I believe it's at, I think it's BRSU building, but don't quote me on that because I'm still not sure exactly where the meeting is yet. And if we vote that it's advisable to merge, the next step is that we finalize this study report. So we have to send this report to the state Board of Education. So we're going to get this report, and our consultant, Dan French, the former superintendent of the Bennington-Rutland Supervisory Union, he's been working on this report. And the report is sent to the state with a recommendation, and also has in there bylaws that help to govern this future district, okay, like a mini constitution. And so that's sent to the state, and if the AOE, the Agency of Education, will look at it and examine it and communicate with us. Here's what, you know, any tweaks you need to make. If they like it, they'll make a recommendation to the state board about whether this is a good idea or not. And if the state board approves that proposal, we're thinking that will be sent to them in December. They have a meeting on December 20th, I believe. And if they approve that the proposal, then it's going to come back down south where the districts would vote on it sometime in the spring of 2017. And we've been kicking around town meeting day, and that's we're not fully clear yet what exact day that will be yet. But sometime in the spring, if we get this far. But it's similar to the legislative process. Things can, you know, get hung up or die along the way. And so the new if this merger were to pass, then we'd have the new board would be elected, okay? And I'll talk about what that will look like. And there'll be a transition period where we'll have 2 boards, okay? We'd have a new board that wouldn't have any authority yet, okay? Because they'd have to do a lot of planning. And then we'd have the existing board that would retain their authority but would be preparing to dissolve. And that would be in the spring or summer. And then the effective merger date would be July 1, 2018. That's the beginning of the fiscal year. Okay, so that's a timeline right now that we've been looking at and we've been basing our assumptions on. Now, what would be different if we were to merge? And this is, I'm from Manchester and I designed this presentation for Manchester initially, but it's not just Manchester the board would dissolve. All the school boards would dissolve and would be replaced by a new board. There'd be one budget for the new district. That's one budget, okay, for the new district. So currently we have, 6, 7 district budgets that comprise the member districts. So we have one budget. Then you have the supervisory union budget on top of that. And then we have one annual meeting for new district. So, in Manchester we have the annual meeting the night before the Monday, right? The Monday before town meeting day. So we'd have one annual meeting with all the member districts. So that's, it's a different, you have to think about that a little bit differently, but all our neighbors, we'd have one annual meeting. And we'd have one equalized tax rate eventually. That would, I'll show you what the tax models look like in a second, but after the first few years, everyone had the same equalized tax rate. Okay, that's pre-CLA. I'm not gonna get into tax CLA adjustments, but that's the pre-CLA without municipal taxes. And then we'd have a new supervisory union and maybe some new district neighbors. So what would be the same in your district? So if you're from Manchester, Dorset, the mountain towns, 9 through 12 choice is not going to change. It's not going to. You're still going to have 9 through 12 choice. That's something this committee has felt strongly about. We have no interest in altering 9 through 12 choice. What could change is the amount of the tuition amount. All right, and that doesn't really. In Manchester, Burn gets $16,200 this year, okay? And everyone else, if you send your kid to Long Trail or any other private school, they get $14,773, which is the state union average, which is determined by the state. But if you live over the mountain, let's say in Londonderry or the mountain towns, they determine up there that no matter where you go, you'll get the equivalent amount. So you'll get this year, if you went to SMS, or if you went to St. Paul in New Hampshire or wherever, you get that $16,200. That's up for the new electorate to determine. Okay, so that's one. So that's a difference, about $1,500 that would change maybe in Manchester. And your local school stays open for at least 4 years after merger, and I'm pretty confident to say that. The only so the law says it's very hard to close a school after the first 4 years. I think if I remember correctly, it requires a vote within that town or the affected towns to approve that. But after that, it's up to the new board has some authority to close a school. But we determined that in order for a school to be closed, it will require 3/4 vote of that whole new board and some other pieces too. There would have to be an advisory vote in that town, so the larger of the towns affected. So the larger electorate knows how those communities feel about closing the school. And there's a few other pieces. Am I missing any pieces with school closure? The advisory, public hearings, right? And there's some other things that would have to happen. But that's the first 4 years. It's very, very difficult to close a school. So the focus of our work, I broke it down into 4 components. The first component here is regional effects. We have to think a lot about what are the regional effects if we merge. How is this going to affect our neighbors? How is this going to affect this current ecosystem in which we operate? And so this this Bennington-Rutland Supervisory Union is currently, the supervisory union that all these schools are part of. The Mountain Towns Red came into the BRSU a few years ago, so they're a new neighbor. And so we had to think about if we merge, how will this affect the people around us? Would we geographically isolate anyone? So that was a big part of our consideration. And we talked a lot, and we considered too, if we somehow were to break apart from the BRSU, even though that's not up to us, that's really up to the state. The state draws the boundaries for the supervisory unions. We have no discretion over which supervisory union we can be in, we can request, right? But we have no discretion over what supervisory union we're in. And but we did talk a lot about, there's this institutional wisdom that's been cultivated over years in the BRSU, and I think a lot of people on the committee appreciated the work and the centralization of services and the diversity of programming because of the BRSU's existence. And we said, we do appreciate the institutional wisdom, so we were mindful of that. So how could the supervisory union change? Now, some of you might not know what a supervisory union is, and I don't, governance structures are complicated. And so all the districts represented by these folks up here, they're in a supervisory union, and we are in the Bennington-Rutland Supervisory Union. And right now, these are the members of the Bennington-Rutland, these are the district members of the Bennington-Rutland Supervisory Union. Now, Bennington-Rutland supervisory unions have been around, since 1912, I think, and the purpose there was to have a central office and a superintendent that provided supervision over those districts. So still, if we were to merge, we would have that one superintendent supervising us in that supervisory union. And so these are the current districts. If we were to merge, then we would have, here's a potential model we're looking at. Now this is just educated guesswork. So we have our Northshire district. I should change that to the Taconic and Green school district. And we have Paula and Rupert. They would likely be a neighbor in the new supervisory union. And then we have the Winhall Sandgate. They could be another, they potentially could merge as well because they don't operate a school. They're K through 12 choice. And then we have Arlington, who has really no dance partner right now. They have no choice. They operate their own high school, which is relatively unusual for this local area. So they don't, we're operating on the assumption that, remember I said that the state draws the boundaries for the supervisory unions. We're operating on the assumption that because of our geographical relation to Arlington, they could group us in the same supervisory union as them. Right now, we're working with the governance committee of the BRSU and talking to our neighbors because we don't want to be underrepresented on the supervisory union board, the future supervisory union board. So the current Bennington-Rutland Supervisory Union has about 20 members on it. And the default methodology for determining how many members you get on a supervisory board is that every district gets about 3 members, or gets 3 members, right? Unless you don't operate any grades. If you're full choice, like Winhall, you get 1 member. So Manchester right now, to give an example, has 3 of the 20 or so members on the supervisory union board. So we think that it's important that we are represented based on our proportion. Based on the population that we have in this new merged district, we would have about 60% of the population and 60% of the students in this potential supervisory union. So we're working with our neighbors right now to develop a model that's fair and that's equitable and that represents us adequately on that new supervisory union board. And so another component we spoke about was addressing the policy objectives of Act 46. And here are the 4 policy objectives: to increase equity, maintain or increase educational outcomes, maximize efficiency, deliver transparency, and so we had to research, if we merged, would merger benefit us in these areas? And at the same time, would it do so at a cost that taxpayers, students, and families that they appreciate? So that's a lot of our research we did, and I'm happy to share with any of you. We have a whole worksheet developed that before the report's sent out, we can send you that worksheet with exactly the findings of our research. But I'm going to highlight just a few of them. So this right here is from the Manchester School Board's budget. We had a budget last year, and I was on the school board last year, and we had a budget meeting and to model what our potential tax rate could be and the spending based on the current programming and everything else. And so the reason I'm showing you this is because here's one potential benefit of merging. And so this is FY16, and this is FY17. All right, and this is, we're looking at FY17 and saying, okay, if we maintain programming and we had some other increases that we couldn't really control on the Manchester School Board. So we had special education increases, right? And those special education, remember, is centralized in the supervisory union office. Local school boards don't really have much say over that. Okay, that's supervisory board, supervisory union board and office. And then you have these other SU's assessments, and then you have some other increases in spending. And so a portion of those were out of the control of the local school board, so over this increase in spending. Now, what determines your tax rate is a combination of things, but the two biggest factors that determine your tax rate are the spending of the school district and the number of students in the school district, right? So if you think of that spending per pupil, and there's a whole lot of other calculations that go into it, but if you notice that we have the spending went up, right, and the pupil count was projected to go down in Manchester. And so why did it go down? We can have a whole long debate about that, but there are demographic shifts in communities. So the important part that I want you to see here is that when you have these elements that might be out of control, and then there's a penalty, right, at this time we were operating on the assumption there'd be a larger penalty for increasing our spending and going over these thresholds. We projected an increase in the tax rate. So the reason I'm showing you this, that's not what your tax rate is now, by the way. I'm just saying that was a projection. This was just a model. But the reason I'm showing you this is last year in the Manchester School District, there were budget discussions on the board. There are a lot of things that were out of our control, okay? And we are one small district. Now, if you have a larger district, potentially you could stabilize some of those fluctuations in your spending and in your student count. Okay, so if we had a larger district, potentially, this is one argument that's made for merging, right? Those demographic changes in the communities, right? For example, in Manchester, the median household price has been very high the past few years, and it's been coming down. This year in Manchester, right, at MEMS, there are about 25 more students than there were last year. So we have so potentially we have these demographic changes in the communities. Which makes it really hard for school boards to budget accordingly. The analogy that's been made is kind of like living paycheck to paycheck, because it's hard to predict. Now, one argument that's made is if you have that larger district, okay, and that it won't be as susceptible to those fluctuations in spending or the demographic fluctuations especially. So that's one argument that's made. And so hopefully you could stabilize programming and not have to feel like you have to potentially put it under the knife every year. So that's one possible outcome. So here's some other possible outcomes. Right now we are currently thinking we're going to provide public choice within school districts. We're going to recommend that. We don't have the authority on this committee to say that everyone's going to have public choice. Let me explain what public choice is. And so we're just thinking we're going to recommend this for 7th and 8th grade. So public choice is a mechanism where if you live in a larger district, you could potentially have the option to send your student to another school outside your town. So if I lived in Manchester and I liked what they were doing in Dorset or Floodbrook, I could potentially apply and get a lottery, if there's a lottery, whatever it may be, and I could send a student to another school if they had the space. We're not going to decide what that looks like. We're going to discuss it, but that's a possible innovation for the new school district to provide that in-district public choice. And that came out of the discussion about Sunderland and Danby and Mount Tabor. They don't operate a middle school. So, we said, where do these students go to school? And again, that's up for the new board to decide. And so because of that discussion, we said, okay, we need to put some recommendations out there. So either, we can't just give those students public choice to go wherever they want. That might be illegal and could be unfair to the rest of the people in the larger district. And so that's still a question up for consideration, but that's a possibility that within this new merged district, the new board could potentially make it that students could go to different places, middle school students especially. We didn't talk much about elementary students because a lot of research shows that moving students, elementary students, far away from their community school it doesn't translate to good educational outcomes, and we didn't get into that too much. But that's a possibility. We talked about stabilizing staffing patterns, and if you have a half-time Spanish teacher in one school, in Floodbrook, and a half-time Spanish teacher in Manchester, would this provide an easier avenue for have one full-time position working in both those schools? And that can happen now, but again, it's hard. It's hard for these boards to communicate with each other, as I'll talk about in a moment. Could it happen more? Right? And if we can have more full-time positions and fewer part-time positions, are we going to get a deeper applicant pool? We're going to get better teachers applying if there's possibilities for full-time positions. And it could help us to explore the viability of a regional middle school and magnet schools. A magnet school is an area, that is or specialized school that specializes in something. And that's something that's never really been explored in our communities. And here's the analogy I like to use. We're familiar with silos. So if you think of silos, if you think of our current board structures as silos of governance, right? It's been going on for 20, 30 years, this idea of talking about a regional middle school. I saw my health teacher from 7th grade at MEMS recently, and she shared with me, oh yeah, they've been talking about that forever, 20, 30 years. The idea has never, to my knowledge, has never really fully been explored if it's viable and a good idea to have a regional middle school. And we can maybe attribute that lack of exploration to the siloed nature of our board structure. For example, the Manchester board now and the Dorset board now just can't go out to drinks at the Perfect Wife and talk about how great it would be to, and plan a regional middle school because it's illegal, right? And so it's hard for other districts to communicate with each other. And so if we were to merge together in one district, the analogy is we could be under one roof, and it could potentially be better for that collaboration and innovation. But it's a trade-off, right? And that's the trade-off that we need to consider, the electorate needs to consider. So you could potentially have this gain of local, so you have our current structure, right? And you have complete local decision-making as far as, we talked about there are some things out of your control, like the SU assessments and things like that. But you have more decision-making power, the current structure. But you give up the collaboration and with the neighbors. And you also, that scale, right? Right now we don't have, I talked about before, the budgetary scale and how we're susceptible to fluctuations in demographics, and that's hard to control the budget because of that. So the trade-off is, if we merge, we have room for more innovation and collaboration, we increase scale, but we give up local decision-making to some degree. That's another argument that's made by a lot of people. And so, this idea of local control, right? This is one of the big knocks against Act 46, is that does it force local school districts to give up local control? And that's a fair argument, right? Because if you have to dissolve your local board, right? Counter argument to that is, what is control? Is control, maybe control is a function of the number of options that you have. And it's hard to make a lot of changes and innovations if you have limited options, all right? If you're on the budgetary gun year in, year out. So that's something for the electorates, for the voters, and for all of us to consider, is that trade-off. That's one of the big trade-offs of merging. The next component was post-merger governance and operations. So we had to look at board structures, and we had to look at operations the first year. So the first year especially. Beyond that first year, that's for the new board to look at. So again, one component that we analyzed was is this more transparent to voters and to the districts? And again, we'd have one district board, one budget, one tax rate, could there be more resources for explanations, right? So the BRSU office has to put a lot of resources into developing these budgets and then trying to explain each of these budgets at the annual meeting. So if you had one budget, potentially, you could have more resources put towards explaining that budget, and maybe it's more transparent to the voters. We all know how complicated these budgets can be in these small districts. And you know, would it be easier for our press to look at the budgets and to digest those easier and to explain that for the community? And would it translate to better board candidates? We have more competition, I should say, over board candidates. We have board seats that go vacant in our districts. They're hard to fill. So would this create competition for our board seats? And I'll show you the board structure right now. So we have all these, you know, six districts right now that would merge into one district. Here's the board structure that we looked at, that we have developed. And we have a 13-member school board in this new unified district. So the compromise that we had, we went back and forth on this, and you know, the smaller towns don't want to get muscled out by the larger towns, right? Because you could just go straight proportional and say, this Manchester gets the number of votes or seats based on the population it has, okay? Well, Mount Tabor's not going to like, or Landgrove's not going to like that, because they're going to get muscled out, okay? And you know, I think we know something about this being in Vermont, or as a small state in the federal government, right? And so we can empathize with that. Here's the compromise we reached. The larger towns didn't want to be underrepresented either. And so we had a unanimous vote on this that we're going to have nine of the seats will be designated for the nine towns that are comprised in this district. Okay, so if you are, but here's the but, everyone votes on all of these 9 seats. So if you, take a Landgrove seat. In Landgrove, if you are going to run for the Landgrove seat, you need to be a resident of Landgrove. All right, and you need to, you know, you get petitioned on, you have to get signatures from people in Landgrove, in a way nominated by the people of Landgrove. But once it goes to the ballot, everyone votes on that. It's called at-large voting. And then we have these other 4 seats. This is the other part of the compromise, that those 4 seats are up for grabs amongst the 4 largest towns. So there's a competitive nature to it, where Manchester, Dorset, Londonderry, and Danby would compete over those 4 seats. And again, it's at-large voting. So everyone in that new merged district would vote on those seats. And the purpose of that is that, you know, the people from a representative from Mount Tabor and from the smaller towns like that, because they're concerned that Manchester, for example, who has by far the largest town, the Manchester voters would just use their numbers and squeeze everyone else out. Well, because potentially Manchester could have 5 seats on the new merged district board. But that's unlikely to happen, to have all those 5 seats. If the voters in other districts are other towns, are paying attention. It's a little check to power here, where the towns in the other districts, if they see all these Manchester names on the ballot, they might not be inclined to vote all Manchester. So it creates this, it creates this competitive nature, we thought, but also creates this environment which I think the committee really reflects that, hey, we're kind of in this together, and we all need to be paying attention. We need to be paying attention to who's running. You know, if I'm from Peru, I need to be paying attention, who's the Sunderland rep, because this affects our schools and our tax rate and our kids. And so that was another part that we thought was a good added bonus here, that really, you know, it pushes engagement and it pushes us to pay attention. As far as the first year operations, transportation, essentially the status quo for that first year. Right, there's no big changes. The new board would make the policy changes. There's no big changes as far as transportation goes. Okay, so we're not going to eliminate buses or anything like that. That's for the new board to figure out policy, excuse me. And the same with school operations. There's not going to be, when I say school operations, we're not going to be closing any schools. We're not going to be doing anything drastically. The board, as far as the board's authority, we're not recommending any major changes as far as school operations. The assets and liabilities are, everything's thrown into, and this gets into the finances, which I'll talk about next. The assets and liabilities, all our districts currently have assets and they have liabilities. They have bond payments and they have buildings they own and they have reserve funds. Upon merger, that's all thrown into one pot. Okay, so if you're that's into the new budget. So that's an important consideration. And people in Sunderland have paid a lot of attention to this because they've collected a lot of impact aid over the years from their national forest land. And they're gonna have to figure out what they're going to do with that. But they've been talking about that a lot. But that's an important consideration, that everything, all the assets and liabilities are thrown into one pot, okay? So remember, it's just not like this is not, the assets and liabilities are owned by the school district, they're not by the town. And it gets confusing that we sometimes think that the town, that we get town governance mixed up with school governance. The school district is separate than the town. They always have been. Okay, so we're not taking from the municipality or the select board or anything like that. It's all in a separate structure. And so getting to the last component here was the financial analyses. So we modeled out what these would look like. And so the financial carrot for merging is the property tax incentives. And Act 46 incentivizes you to merge, incentivizes districts to merge with property tax incentives. Here's my second big disclaimer of the night. I'm not promising anything. We're not promising anything here about your tax rate. We're not so foolish to say that your tax rate's going to go down. So just remember I said that. All right, don't become looking for me at 2 in the morning when you get your tax bill next year or 2 years from now. But we modeled the tax rate based on the current year. So whenever you build a model, you have to make assumptions. And we used the FY17 budgets. And so we took the FY17 budgets and we modeled everything off of that. Now, healthcare costs are expected to increase. We're not getting into what we expect to happen. We're using all the information we have currently and modeling off of that. So, I teach economics. The concept is ceteris paribus, all other things unchanged. So all other things unchanged, we have, this is in Manchester, and I'll show the other towns in a second, the FY17 equalized tax rate. All right, that's without your municipal tax rate. That's without the CLA applied to it. That's just your equalized tax rate was at $1.63. Modeled with the tax incentives for that first year is $1.55. That's an 8-cent reduction for your tax rate. Now, don't ask, another disclaimer, don't ask me to calculate your tax bill, right? Because we can't, based on that, because income sensitivity is a huge part of it too. A lot of Vermonters are income sensitized to their property taxes. And so you see down here that post-merger, the first year is 8 cents for the incentive, then it goes down to 6 cents, the next year, 4, 2, and then it's gone. And so here, we have, this is for the other communities, and you can see this is the FY17 equalized tax rate, okay? And here is based on the model, the projected equalized tax rate, and there's this limitation that says your tax rate can't go up by more than 5% from the previous year, or it can't decrease by 5%. Okay, so there's limitation in the law, and that's why the numbers don't look a little funky for some of them. So you can see your community here. This is just a model, though, so don't get your hopes up or don't get worried yet. It's just a model. It gives you we had to do this. This is part of the process of making a plan. Do I have any questions right now about this? Question? So the question is, the money for the incentives comes out of the general education fund. So I'm not an expert on education funding in the general fund, but I think that what's important to think about here is the education funding system, and I'm sure Oliver could speak to this better than I could, is education funding system is a closed loop system, okay? So what that means is that if we are going to get incentives, all of us Vermonters have to pay for it, okay? So this is like the grab bag time now, where people are getting those incentives. If we don't get the incentives, we're going to be paying more for other people's incentives. And I think that's done through the best mechanism that happens through is something called the property yield. Is that the best, Oliver? Is that property yield number as one way? That's kind of getting the minutia here a little bit. But that's what's important to think about. Is a closed loop system, and we all end up paying for it as Vermonters.
Yeah, just a point of clarification, the term incentives is thrown around a lot. I prefer to use the term stabilization because really the intent was, as you're bringing disparate tax rates together into one district, you're always going to have winners and losers. So the concept behind these incentives was really to provide some stabilization for those folks as they were making that transition. So
the stick to for not merging is, we say we will likely have to merge anyway, and that's not a guarantee. But I don't think everyone's as happy on the dance floor, last fall. But using the dance floor analogy, right? There's a lot of people on the dance floor in 2015 trying to find dance partners. Okay, and the reminder. You have to have the same choice option to find your dance partner. If we don't merge, if one of the districts doesn't merge, right, you lose, and other people do, you might lose some dance partners. Okay, and you might not be able to control your own destiny as much. And as you can see here in this timeline for this is the state's timeline for Act 46. We're here, around here, this is the voter approval, okay, for the regional education district. That's the type of district we're looking at merging into. It's called a red. And if we move along here, okay, and you can see, that down here, the state starts to make, in 2018, the state board's making final proposal issuance of the that's their deadline. They have to make their final proposal, and then we get here at the state July 1, 2019 State Board of Ed statewide plan effective date. Okay, and so the state will make according to all the information we have now, right? Basically, I got this from the AOE website. I just put it on a timeline. That the state Board of Ed will find you a dance partner, potentially. And we have, because of our choice structure around here, we have a lot of districts around us right now that have the same choice option, right? They're potential dance partners. You may not want to dance with them, but you might be put with them. And here's the teeth of Act 46. So it says here that November 30th, 2018, the state board shall publish on the agency's website its order merging and realigning districts and supervisory unions where necessary. Okay, so that's one interpretation is that's the teeth of it, where they can order you to merge, if that makes sense. Question? Yes. Okay, so I think the question is that if we don't pass a merger, the state will determine who we merge with. That's not completely. There's still more time to merge. If you look back at this timeline, right? Yes. So if merger failed in our area, then we would, if we don't merge by July 1, we miss out on the incentives, right? We don't get those tax incentives. But after that, you can still merge. You miss out on those incentives. So there's still time to merge until the date is proposal by. Okay, where is it? They didn't put a deadline even on the website. That's what I remember. But you have to have, yes?
But if you don't are part of the merger by November 30th, you have to to send your proposal for your local school district of what your plan is. Is that-
Yeah, I think it's for non-merging districts. That's what it said. Yeah, if we didn't want to merge with anyone, right? Maybe that's Arlington. If Arlington didn't want to merge with anyone, then they could send. Then they have to send it to the state by November 30th. But there's still time to merge afterwards. But you lose out on those incentives. And so let me explain one more piece about this. The member districts of this study committee have some are advisable and some are necessary. So Manchester, Dorset, and the Mountain Towns Red are currently necessary. We've listed them as necessary. What that means is if the vote goes down in one of those districts, the electorate votes it down, then the merger fails. If it fails in Sunderland, Danby, or Mount Tabor, who is advisable, then the merger can still proceed. So if it totally fails, then we have to reconvene a new study group, my understanding is, and then start from scratch again. Question. So the question is, are we under the alternative structure of Act 46? We're really under Act 153. My understanding from the state is that alternative structure is the same as the structure, the regional education district structure of Act 153, and then one and the same.
But there's a preferred merger structure or an alternative merger structure, right?
Yes. The question is there a preferred structure or an alternative structure? Yes. It falls under the alternative structure or the red, right? And so this is getting into the weeds with the preferred structure. We've kind of determined that we're not really up for the preferred structure because it's a supervisory district. If you want me to explain what that means.
John, I think
Yeah.
we could say, what you're saying is the preferred structure is the supervisory district.
Correct.
And then the alternative structure would be a regional education district within the supervisory union.
It's a supervisory union with a minimum number of practical school districts, correct?
Yes, but so what we had kind of concluded through talking to the State Board of Education and our advisors is that really we don't have a choice in that. That's going to be something that whether we're an SD or an SU is going to be up to the state, and largely because of that geographic isolation piece. So we're going to kind of create a red. Ideally, the preferred structure would be that red would be an SD, just a supervisory district, but that's not really the choice. The committee has no authority to make that choice.
So my question is, if you're falling under the alternative structure, which we pretty much are, and I understand it's up to the state to determine which way it goes, but why are any of the districts necessary? Because either way, if one of them falls out, you're still a supervisory union with the fewest practical number of districts.
The other districts could be in a different. If Sunderland and Danby and Mount Tabor voted this down, they could be in another school district.
But even if Manchester opted out, and all the other districts got together, you're still the same supervisory union with the fewest number of practical districts.
We don't necessarily know that. We're focused on. We're not focused on so much about the supervisory union. We're not making a recommendation for preferred structure, which is the supervisory structure, supervisory district structure, or the alternative. 6 months ago we thought we had a lot more say in what we became. We're just focused on if making the recommendations and analyzing the implications and benefits for that school district. So I hope that answers the question. I don't want to get into the whole supervisory district discussion because it's something that we don't really have control over, and it's a whole other aspect that adds a layer of complexity. But I'm happy to speak with anyone individually about that. Yes, go ahead. Good. Thank you, Melanie. So Melanie's point was, we're forming a red, and there's criteria you have to meet for forming a red. You have to have a minimum number of districts, I think it's 4, and a minimum number of students, which is, I think, is 1,200. And so that's the criteria we're looking at, and that's why we have it advisable versus necessary. And thank you for clarifying that. Question. Oh, good question. So the question is, why do we choose 9 through 12 and not through 7 through 12 choice? So the school boards, when they set up the study committees, they indicated that we'd be maintaining 9 through 12 choice. In order to go 7 through 12 choice, we'd have to close the middle schools, the 7th and 8th grade. We could not operate 7th and 8th grade in our school districts. You can't operate a school, a public school, and give choice. It's illegal. Does that make sense? So there was not the will to close the 7th and 8th grades in Floodbrook, Dorset, and Manchester. Okay? And so this point here is, we may not be able to choose who we leave the dance with, right? We may not be able to choose, if we don't merge, who we end up merging with. So what we need from you is to continue to spread the word. We have I think, maybe Sue, do you know, is it the BRSU? Are you guys ready for hold a meeting at our? Okay, thank you. We have a meeting on Monday where we vote on whether it's advisable to merge or not. The November forum, you're here now. We're going to have other forums in the future, provided we continue to move forward. And most importantly, here's the hardest part, I personally think, about such a merger change and a consolidation, is that it does require us a shift in mindset of who we believe our kids are. All right, so if you're from Manchester, you might think of, our kids are Manchester kids. So the paradigm shift that will have to occur for us as fellow community members, if we are to merge into this district, we need to think about, redefine who our kids are. Our kids, if we merge together, all our kids are Manchester, Dorset, all the mountain towns, Sunderland, Danby, Mount Tabor. If they're in that new district, those are all of our kids. And that's, I think it's easier for me to say as a BBA teacher and as someone who went to BBA and grew up here, who shared a lot of experiences with people from all these communities. I can see that, but that's a harder leap for some people. And that's one of those trade-offs, right? One of those considerations that voters need to make. Am I willing to redefine that paradigm of who our kids are? And this committee, this has kind of been the cornerstone of our work. And the committee is really positive and gets along great, even though we're from different communities. And so last meeting, we even created the model for the study itself is all of our kids are all of our kids, right? And that we, recognizing that thought, that belief that, all right, if we're going to do this, we need to change our mindset. And so that's, again, that's something that voters, if it gets to a vote, that voters should consider. Am I ready to redefine that paradigm? And so please just stay connected. Here's my information up here. There's some frequently asked questions. I think we're running out of them here. Be informed. Give us your thoughts and stay engaged and get other people involved. So I think that's a really important point. If everyone, a lot of the curriculum is already centralized, in supervisory unions, and our SU does a great job. And if all the SUs operated as well as our SU, Act 46 may have never have occurred, right? So I don't want to argue that point. Yeah, go ahead, Jay.
I think you're absolutely right. And we actually had a meeting where all the principals of all the schools came and met with us. And one of the main things that they said is they already collaborate so much on like the intellectual level. And you're absolutely right. The SU takes care of the curriculum and the sped spending. But one thing that stood out is that the principals told us is not only would they be able to intellectually share resources, with one district and one budget, it would be now legal for them to share financial resources as well. That's one thing that they can't do. You can't take the Spanish teacher that's being paid for through the flood budget and have that Spanish teacher teach Spanish in Manchester, because it's two separate budgets. So even though intellectually they can work with each other, and they do, now they would be able to share financial resources.
It's one of the areas that is rather confusing. The amount of collaboration that's done with the districts within the supervising union is admirable. But the one thing that was an eye-opener for me is how cumbersome this is for the administrators and the administration in general to write different contracts for different schools. They have to write a contract for each district that is going to share a teacher, or transfer budget through the BRSU, which is terribly cumbersome. The one place where efficiencies come in by having one district with one budget is this elimination of the duplication that happens and the awkwardness of being able to share staff and teachers contractually. It really is an area where we get much greater convenience.
So I think one important thing to do, is to talk to your principals too about ask them what they think, right? They are going to be able to tell you better than us what efficiencies could be gained, how they could potentially better share resources or not. So have that conversation with them, and hope. I think they'd be candid with you. They certainly gave us a lot of good feedback when they met with us, and so that was helpful. Well, no, there's still some time for you to. So let's say we went to March. We went to March at a March vote, right? We really have until July 1st. We could bring it back to the voters potentially. So there's still time. And then if it fails after that, if the merger totally fails, then you still have time to reconvene another study group, my understanding is, and develop a whole new, and go through the whole process again. What the landscape will look like, that's for the conventional mergers post July 1. But again, that's an area I'm not really an expert on as far as what happens in year 3. We've been focusing on year 2. We don't have the authority to make those decisions. So talk to your school board members. So they currently have that authority. If they wanted to make a regional middle school, for example, they could right now. Right? We don't have that authority. So it's pretty clear in the law that as a study committee we can't do that. So we don't. First of all, we don't assign. Right? This committee doesn't assign. So remember I spoke about that board has that transition period, right? Before it becomes effective. They need to figure that out. Where a kid's going to go. If you're from Sunderland, where Sunderland kid's going to go for 7th and 8th grade. So that's one. Maybe they'll assign them all to go to MEMS, or maybe they'll say, let's look at a public in-district choice model where you could, if there's vacancies in the school, you can try to apply to get into there with a lottery or something. So I think my larger point is that that new board has that authority. We don't, right? We don't want to. We can't, and we don't want to have them be hamstrung to any one possibility. So they have to look at the cards where they fall. So is 18, 19, we developed very specific grandfathering language for this. And so we talked about it so many times, I forget what the exact language is. But if you're grandfathered in, right? If you're a Sunderland kid who has 7th grade choice, right, and goes to Maple Street, let's say, you would be grandfathered in, and you'd be able to finish 7th and 8th grade. Does that make sense? And if you had a younger sibling who is a year younger, right? Yeah, who also attends the same school, because we didn't want to disrupt that family dynamic or having them transported different places, they would also be grandfathered in. I think I'm getting that right. Am I getting it right? Yeah. Is the year's not in there? Okay, we got to put the year in there. Yes. We're in the first year post-merger. Yeah, so that'd be 2018-19, I think, is the first year, correct? Okay.
What you're saying is who has control over what school your child goes to for 7th and 8th grade after the merger is complete and after the grandfathering is finished. We can't really answer that question completely because what that is up to the new board that's formed. They will decide those rules. So you would still have a little bit of control because you'd be able to petition the board. You would be able to put your opinions to that, but we can't really know what the board will decide.
You speak, then I'll speak to that.
Okay. Well, I just feel like being a representative from the red is, we've gone through this all before, and you're right, it doesn't save any money. What it does is it stabilizes it. Because that equalized pupil number is not fluctuating so much in a larger district, you can count on the fact that your taxes aren't going to go up and down constantly every year. It'll kind of, rather than peaks and valleys, it'll even it out. Whether or not it will actually save you money is a good point. It probably won't make much of a difference, especially once those incentives go away, but it will stabilize the tax rate. And one thing the state board has made very clear is that maintaining what you already have is not acceptable. They will not accept that. Because I agree that BRSU is a great supervisory union. We have wonderful schools. It works very well for us, but one thing the state will refuse is to say we're just going to stay the same. That's not going to fly. They've made that very clear. So we have to do something. You know.
One more question, we good? Well, thank you very much for coming, and enjoy your night. Thanks, guys.